Gumba Malgan, Gumba Nanigiyanindu, which is good evening. It's good to see you in Barragum, which is the traditional language of the community that I grew up on the Darling Downs. And in honour of our guest artist this evening, I also ask Kuni Ba Nari, which is "Are you good?" in Wanyi greeting from the northwest Queensland, which is a country that Gordon is connected to. And 2019 is the International Year of Indigenous Languages, and I'm sure you all saw the billboard in Stanley Place that tells you about that. And the International Year of Indigenous Languages gives us the opportunity to profile the significant work that the State Library of Queensland's been doing over the last decade to document, preserve and make accessible the traditional languages of Queensland. And it's been really terrific that we've had a giving circle that's enabled us to do some of that work this year, and some of the people who've contributed to that giving circle are with us this evening. So good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Vicky McDonald, and it's my great privilege to be the State Librarian and CEO here at the State Library of Queensland. And on behalf of my colleagues, I welcome you to this evening's Portrait of an Artist conversation. We acknowledge Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and their continuing connection to land, and as custodians of stories for millennia. We are inspired by this tradition in our work to share and preserve Queensland's memory for future generations. I'd like to also acknowledge and welcome, firstly, of course, Gordon Hookey, our special guest artist for this evening, James C Sourris AM and his sister Marika, Shannon Brett, who will be interviewing Gordon this evening, donors and supporters of the State Library, friends, ladies and gentlemen. It's certainly fantastic to see you all here this evening. And it's also terrific to have Gordon here at State Library this evening in this International Year of Indigenous Languages. His work has been exhibited around the world and is held by several major national art galleries. And Gordon uses his art as a platform to highlight historical and contemporary political issues, and has come to prominence in the last 10 years as an outspoken critic of racism. Gordon was born in Conclari, and he first picked up a paintbrush in grade 2. He grew up reading Dr. Seuss books, like many of us, I'm sure, enjoying their rhythm and language, play, and used it as a device in his artistic practice. Using bold, comic-like text and a spectrum of vibrant colours, Gordon has developed a unique and immediately recognisable style. The James C Sourris AM collection is part of the Australian Library of Art collection here at the State Library and is available online for everyone, everywhere to enjoy. The James C Sourris AM collection of interviews allows us to understand the motivations and perspectives that underpin some of Australia's most respected contemporary artists. The Portrait of an Artist series brings the collection to life, allowing us to go a bit deeper. And these oral history interviews are conducted in the studios of the artists, where they reflect on what has shaped and influenced their work. And these interviews provide unique and significant insights into their practice. Their collection is of enormous benefit to art lovers, researchers, historians and students here in Queensland, but also everywhere around the world. And tonight I'd like to make special mention of an artist featured in one of these interviews, Gordon Shepherdson. Sadly, Gordon passed away this month, but his legacy will live on for generations to come through the James C Sourris AM collection. As custodians of Queensland memory, State Library embraces and nurtures knowledge, storytelling and creativity. And we hope tonight's screening will help inspire a sense of possibility in your own life. We want the State Library of Queensland to be an important touch point for everyone in Queensland. Coming up in September is one of the biggest events on the State Library calendar, the Brisbane Writers' Festival. And at this year's festival, you can experience Gordon's work in Angel's Palace, an installation of a 7.5 high dome featuring a print of an original piece by Gordon, and it's accompanied by digital animation as well as soundscape. So I know that many people will be looking forward to seeing Angel's Palace again here at the Cultural Centre. But it's now time for me to step aside, and we're going to get inside Gordon Hookey's mind and learn more about the process, the people and places that informs his work. So if you're joining the conversation on social media tonight, don't forget to use the hashtag #SLQPortrait. State Library is a respected cultural institution, and we provide a safe and welcoming space for everyone. So speakers at our events often hold a wide range of views and come from diverse backgrounds. So there may be differing points of view among our audience tonight, but I encourage everyone to listen respectfully and save any questions for our Q&A session at the end of tonight's talk. So Thank you, and please enjoy the screening first up, and then we'll have the conversation. Thank you.
Gordon, could you introduce us to where you're from and where you were born?
My people are Wanyi. We're further up in the Gulf, and our land and our country also go across the Northern Territory border as well. I was born in a little town called Cloncurry, which is in far northwest Queensland. That's in the heart of Mitakudi country, Mitakudi land. And next to that is Mount Isa, which is Kalkadoon country.
As a child, were you surrounded by art or culture or anything like that in your family?
Every now and then I'd be given, a pen or a pencil and a bit of paper, and I'd draw, or I'd have an uncle who would be showing me how to draw. One of my pathways of coming into contact with art was working as a ranger and having connection with Aboriginal Creations, which was a shop in George Street, and it was run by a fellow called John Conroy. And John had connections or access to all the communities and a lot of local artists. And I was seeing, the kind of work like that, what they were doing, which wasn't, tradition oriented. And I was more interested in that sort of work because it was speaking to me more as a black fella. There was a show called Marucci Art Prize, and people were saying to me, "Oh, look, if you want to be an artist, why don't you put a work in there?" So I ended up doing this work, and what was it about was I just called it, a return to our creation time or something like that, and it was about living today but wanting to be, back where it all started as well. So I done this serpentine type images, and of course, I wanted that connection to tradition as well as to today. So I won first prize, and winning that, it's like maybe there is hope or possibilities, for me to do art.
How did that more political element come into your painting?
Just being a black fella in this country is political. All I do really is look at the world as a black fella and translate that world visually, be it on a canvas or be it on in a sculpture or an installation or a poem. That's all we do. We metaphorically clarify or describe our realities. I directly like to draw on familiarity or pop culture or events which connect people. One of the things that I was moved by was George Orwell's Animal Farm. He looked at a farm of animals as a microcosm to humanity. I started symbolising Aboriginal people as all native animals, from crocodiles to goannas to kangaroos to wombats, and they were all Aboriginal people. But then when I was representing introduced people, they had to be introduced species. So I started using sheep, cane toads, pigs, camel, and other invasive animals.
You also have, I guess, a group of other human figures that you've used throughout your work.
One of the main characters or personalities that I have used of recent times, I call her Bitumen Barbie. She's an Aboriginal woman that is blonde. I set her up like a superhero, whereby she can do amazing things, and she has, extrasensory perception. It's also making comment on Barbie, as in Barbie and Ken, like culture's perception of what is beauty. Like, for example, another one of those characters is a Black Elvis, and I call him Pelvis Deadly. I've done so many works with Black Elvis only because in every Murray community there's usually an Aboriginal Elvis fan. So as a figure of resistance, Bruce Lee came on the scene, you know, so this character was created. Fruit Flea, you know, he's diminutive and he likes to eat fruit. And what he does is he hits people with corn, and what it does, it makes them weak. Thus he defeats them. So that's kind of like just one of the little silly scenarios, you know, within the work that I do.
Behind us there are works about Eddie Gilbert and Dundalli. Can you sort of explain how that's come into your work?
They come out of a greater body of work called Murray Land. It actually came about by this Australian curator that's living in Amsterdam. Her name is Vivian Zaherl, who was working on a massive project called Frontier Imaginaires. She asked me to paint the history of Queensland from an Aboriginal perspective for the Frontier Imaginaires exhibition. I bring personalities and characters from the history, from the past, and I make them relevant today. If there's one thing that humanity is scared of, is nuclear war. And by doing that with Dundalli, I have spears, I have a Woomera, and I have him having nuclear warheads on the end of his spear. But also on another level, look, he's got a Woomera. I mean, that could be seen as reference to the Woomera rocket range as well.
You use text in a lot of your paintings, nearly all of them.
When I think about it, you know, like, it's the English language that I use. I generally say, you know, English is my second language. I don't know my first, because the colonisers had stole it from me. Therefore, you know, I have a license now to use that English language any which way I want. I bastardise it, I misspell it, I break it up into syllables, I make up my own words, and I change it.
Your works often reminds me of, say, comic books or graphic novels.
I was exposed to comics as a kid, like most.
Recently you painted on the outer shell of a great big dome.
There was a writer, Alexis Wright, and you know, the project was about the book, which is totally metaphorical as well. It's very complex, and what I had to do was construct the dwelling, well, Angel's Palace.
The other aspect of your work that I just wanted to bring up was sport.
I do use sport or heroes within sport to heroicize or to make us more powerful.
So this was 8.5 minutes of a longer version of, so this is a shorter version of the film. The actual full-length version and a couple of other shorter versions are on the SLQ website. My name is Shannon Brett. I'm a Waka Waka, Garang Garang and Butchulla woman living here in Brisbane. I'm an artist and arts worker, and I am so pleased to be here tonight to present my good friend Gordon Hookey in conversation for the second iteration of Portrait of an Artist. So just to begin with, I would like to honour and acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that we're on tonight, past, present and future. I'd also like to acknowledge Bruce McLean and his involvement in the film. Please take some time to watch the film. It's really beautiful, and Gordon's speaking about his artwork is fantastic. Getting to know Gordon is really a great thing, and the artwork speaks for itself. I would also like to honour and acknowledge James. Thank you for tonight. This is such a wonderful event, and there are 3 iterations of this year. I would like to also acknowledge the fabulous staff here at the State Library of Queensland. You guys have put on such wonderful events. After we speak, so I won't welcome Gordon on just yet, after we speak this evening, we will open up the floor as like a conversation. So we have roving mics. Towards the end of our conversation, we'll let you know when we can have that open discussion. I think I'll welcome Gordon on now. So, Gordon, if you'd like to take the stage, and we'll welcome.
I was going to do a Toady Barber-like entrance, but I don't play. Hey, what are you doing here? I didn't realise there were so many people here because I was
Neither
facing
did
the
I.
forward and
I
you
was
guys
like, oh
all
my
snuck in
gosh.
somewhere or somehow.
So I think I want to start by just acknowledging this fabulous film that you guys put together. Can you tell me about that conversation on that day? Was it a long shoot? Like, was it just you and Bruce kind of having a conversation? It just looks so insightful. It's like a full run of your career.
Yeah, I mean, on that day, I think filmmakers, there were filmmakers everywhere. There's about 2 or 3 different crews on that day, so I did not know which one was which. And the crew that came to me, that wanted to film me, said, oh, look, we'll only be there for about 2 or 3 hours or so, you know. They were there the whole day, you know. And you know, like one of the guys was, directing, and I think Yadan Thorpe was overseeing everything, and you know, we were there all day, you know, so it's not bad seeing all day get edited to 8 minutes, you know. And, I mean, they were very fruity 8 minutes as well, so...
Yeah, that was a good 8 minutes.
Yeah, so it was quite a good bit of editing there. But you notice I'm trying hard to grow my beard, especially for this night as well. So, yeah, so I'm getting there, aren't I?
So I'd like to speak about perhaps the content inside of the film. And I want to go back to what you were talking about in one section of the film, that was the time that you spent with your uncles and how inspiring they were, perhaps with drawing on the ground. Like you spoke about in the film, you speak about one of your uncles drawing on the ground. You didn't have pencils to draw with. So can you share this story?
Yeah. The wonderful thing about my life up till now is that other than, you know, my partner and children, you know, that come along recently, the most happiest time of my life was as a child, as growing up over the Coppermine Creek in Cloncurry. I mean, we were just living in corrugated iron humpies. But, you know, all my uncles were stockmen. They'd work at Bush for months and they'd come in all cashed up. And they'd get drunk for 3 months, you know. And then the head drover would come in and just wake them up and, you know, take them while they're in the horrors or, you know, out and they'd work another 6 months. But the wonderful thing is that, you know, they were always there. They were like, my uncles were always my father figure. So they kind of, you know, shaped how I am. And like this particular uncle, Uncle Clary, he'd tell stories, lots of stories, you know. And, you know, it's only very recently in my thinking that sometimes these stories will come out in the paintings or work that I do. And there was another uncle, Uncle Chonky. Uncle Chonky was the closest thing to Jimi Hendrix, outside of Jimi Hendrix that I've seen, you know, because Uncle Chonky would always have a guitar around his, strapped on him, and he'd go to the toilet, he'll eat, and I mean but Uncle Chonk, he was so talented in everything. He can draw. That was the uncle that would get all the kids around, and we'd be sitting around, and he'd just have a matchstick, and he'd kind of smooth the ground, and then draw a picture. And the drawings that we was doing was generally of what was happening at the moment, at the time. There might have been a fight up in Prince of Wales Hotel where some blackfellas were kicked out. Old Uncle Uncle Chonky would do that. He'd paint that. But you know what he'd do? He'd put the kids in the story. And he'd be like, well, Gordon was here, and this drunk started pushing, you know, these women around, and Gordon gets up and punches him, and he goes through the swinging doors, you know, and like he'd concoct all these stories with all the kids that were sitting around, and, you know, Terry, he looked at you, and then you looked back and threw him through the window.
Were there any adults? Or just
No, well, all the
mainly
kids
you
were there,
kids?
but
Yeah,
Uncle
yeah.
Chong, he was probably, in his 20s sort of
Yeah,
thing,
yeah.
but he was such
Yeah.
a talented drawer, such a fantastic musician, that, he imparted on all of us, basically, all of the kids that have grown up over the Copmine Creek, he resides in all of us, and same with
Yeah.
Uncle Clary, and there was
And it's that
Uncle Dan- all
storytelling.
these uncles and
It's
and
that
aunties that
storytelling.
were presence in our life as well. I could rave on all about that.
So do you think, well, I'm thinking that, they've played such an important part in building and I guess exposing you to storytelling. So that was from the get-go, all of you guys sitting around your uncles listening to these fantastic stories. I think generally most Aboriginal people would just hear these stories. I remember being so frightened of my grandmother's ghost stories and all of us, and we'd be in the bed and we'd be frightened, but it's just part of it. It's like part of growing up and having those stories told, whether they're true or not. A lot of them are made up, but I'm thinking this kind of foundation is what definitely builds you as a person, yes, but as an artist, you can draw on that. And what I see in your work is, yes, you're saying something about our culture, your culture, but also it's an internal and an individual thing. Do you think?
Oh, absolutely.
Yep.
Like all of our life, our worldview is ingrained in our existence. Like for us blackfellas, we grow up a certain way, and within that way are elements of our tradition as well. One of my cliches that I use quite a lot as an Aboriginal person now, I often say, as a blackfellas, we cannot settle for anything less than what we had before colonisation. See, as Aboriginal people, we've been dispossessed of our country,
Yep.
of our languages.
Of our language.
I'm so glad that there is some action at getting some of our language back. But so we have to aim incredibly high in order to just get crumbs of what we had. And look, I know that, the white fella, you're not going to pack up your bitumen and take your feral animals and go back to where you've come. So realistically, I had to change that cliche. And my cliche is that we cannot settle for anything less than the total and absolute Aboriginalisation of this so-called Australia. And when I spell Aboriginalisation, it's Aboriginal Eyes, E-Y-E-S, Sation of Australia. And all that is saying that we want all of Australians to see things Aboriginal way. So that is derived from the things that, how we grew up, things that were passed from our uncles, our aunties, and it's a continuation from our tradition. And what I'm saying is an invitation for yous to join us, an invitation for yous to speak our Aboriginal language. It's the invitation for yous to own what we've got as well. I want yous to name your children Aboriginal names. I want yous to see this world, well, we want yous to see this world the way that we see it. Not like that with the beer, but
I think in understanding just at the core that this is not an English-speaking country. It's just reminding yourself that this is not an English-speaking country, and educating your children about that, it's not an English-speaking country. Think about that.
Yeah, well, see, the way we are too, it's like, we are an inclusive people. It's in our tradition, our generosity. Our spirit is one of generosity, like when you look at other nations that have been colonised, when you look at, Afro-American, Native American, what developed in many cases is a collective hate for, the invading culture, for the white men. Us people, we've never ever had that. Aboriginal people, we've never had a collective hate. It could have been because we're so many different nations. I was saying this at a talk the other day, and one little fella got up and said, it's because we are lovers, not fighters. And he got up and he done these gyrating movements with his hip.
Hey,
And,
shut up.
And I'm like, oh, is that Elvis Deadly?
Stop it.
But anyway, yeah, I think, you know, the people who we are, we're about life.
Yeah.
We're about a living, and it's and it's about sharing, I guess, too, sort of thing.
It is about sharing, but I think it's also about understanding for the newer Australian to also understand and band together with Aboriginal people. We need to, for the greater community, to be open-minded and also have respect. And I think really for me as a parent, it's people need to educate their children about the First Peoples of this country. So it's really, really important and key topics.
Yeah, not to sound all rose and warm and fuzzy, you know, but, you know, what we're saying is on our terms rather than imposed. What my art says is on our terms, you know, as well. It's so easy, you know, for mining companies and governments to hit us with, you know, their bureaucracy and expect us to, you know, adhere and acquiesce, you know, to their agendas. But it's really not the case, you know, for us on the ground and for our
It's
people.
so painful.
And keep in mind too, like, I'm talking like this, but I don't represent anyone, you know. I don't represent any group. I am only an example of an Aboriginal person. I'm only an example of a black fella. I don't talk for anyone as well. So not everyone, look at me there. I don't usually wear a hat like that.
When was that? Oh my God, what work is that? Okay, so I have like a list, but it's a tiny list, and I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, I'm really probably not even going to talk about half of these things. But what I want to start with is really painting, okay? So when you watch the film, Gordon will speak about being an industrial bricklayer by trade. So that was was that in Mount Isa?
Yeah,
you
Mount
did
Isa
that.
Mines,
Yeah, at Mount Isa Mines, you did that apprenticeship. Yeah. So, but what I want to explore is outside of this apprenticeship, and of course your sculptural elements play into this. Like you've got that making already in you from way back in Mount Isa. What I want to know is where paint came into it. And how did you discover oil paint? Was that at college?
Oh, look, it's so intriguing. I mean, like, the thing is, often being an artist is not really a decision. Either you are or you aren't.
Yep.
I mean, I don't mean to be romantic about and stuff like that, but, you know, it's something that is within. And, you know, I was probably, you know, after I finished my trade, I was only then I was probably realised that I wanted to live this type of way as well, and I wanted to be an artist or make art or what else, you know, and I didn't know what to do, sort of thing. I just said, look, artist paint. I didn't know anything about paint, so I just went and bought oil paints. I thought artist paint with oil paints, so I bought oil paints and this big canvas, and I started painting. I only started and I ran out of paint because I didn't know you had to prime your canvas, and the canvas sucked out all the oil, and I had to wait for the next dole check, sort of thing, you know. And then I thought, I'll go to art college. Then I went to art college at Sydney. Actually, I went to 3 institutions to do my degree. When I first went down to Sydney, it was called Alexander Mackie, and then it changed to City Art Institute, and then it changed to UNSW COFA. So in my
COFA
4 years
days.
of study there, I end up getting, I end up being at 3 institutions. But anyway, I went there to do painting because I thought that's what artists done. But in my foundation year, you do everything. But I got turned off by the painting department because they were all these middle-aged old men who thought that they had this wonderful liquid, and they would fill up all these empty vessels with these with this wonderful liquid they had. And I didn't like that attitude, so I ended up doing sculpture. And that is where my training as a industrial bricklayer came in, because I was the only one that can build things that did not fall down.
That's great. What a story. Okay, so the paint was discovered during your college days. You were in Sydney, so it went from, what was it before Sydney College of the Arts? What was it called again?
City Art
COFA.
Institute, and the new NSW COFA.
So what happened after that? Where did QCA fit into this?
Look, see, I majored in sculpture and installation, and I didn't do I think I might have done a little bit of painting in my foundation year, but I was so turned off that I didn't do any painting classes at all, so I didn't know what I was doing still, you know. But anyway, when I finished art college, I wanted to take on the world as a sculpture, installation artist, you know, and I was looking for all these spaces where I can take on the world. But all the studios and everything that was available were on the second or third floor, and you couldn't take sculpture stuff up there. I couldn't play with clay. I couldn't play with water because it had run down into the flat underneath. So I said, oh, look, I'll just paint. So,
oh my God.
So I just ended up painting again, even though I hadn't been training. But I was lucky because there were a lot of other artists around, and I just, you know, got advice from them about priming, about colours, about oil, about all this. And I've just basically learnt from my peers, you know, as well. And I think it's fantastic, because what had happened as a result of that is that I engineered my own style or my own way of doing things. Had I been trained, you know, I might have been painting like everyone else, you know, like they teach you, you know, to do the drawing with wet paint, and then you put a wash, and then you build up the painting. You know, this is technique that some of the paintings teachers would teach you. But, you know, I just painted in blocks and painted as just, I don't know, just done it.
So you started entering prizes. You've won so many, I imagine, including a Deadly. Does everybody here know what the Deadlies is? Please say yes. So including a Deadly, what did that feel like for you to be this, I mean, rising star of painting, and starting to win these awards? Was that like a big acknowledgement?
I don't go into any of that. I don't like art prizes. I don't like putting work into art prizes, you know, because in the end, I mean, it's got nothing to do with the art that you do.
Correct.
Art prizes had more to do with the people doing the judging, with the people that are selecting the work to go in, than it actually has to do with the artwork or the artist doing it. So, you know, like when I first started, you know, you're wanting to pack your CV, so you have all these shows, you know, and it's a line on your CV, you know, and all that, and you build it up. You know, this is what I was told, but after practicing for a while, you know, you realise, you know, art prizes and putting things in show and all that, it's, you know, for want of a better word, you know, it's a little bit of a wank, you know, as well. And, you know, like, it's good if you can win, because it means money, but, you know, but what it may mean is a little bit of networking and stuff like that, and getting to know certain judges and people. Look, I'm very cynical with this, but, you know, for me and my experience in the art world to date, that's how I see it, you know, as well. So I don't put work into art prizes and things like that unless invited and guaranteed a win, you know, as well. But that never happened.
Okay, talking about invited, so I'm thinking of residencies, including the Albers, but can you talk about your time in residencies? I know you've done a few.
I've done a lot. I was a residency groupie. Like, from when I left art college, like when I was at art college, you know, like I actually finished my degree in Canada at the University of Alberta in Edmonton. So the last 6 months was done there. And I went over there and, you know, just hang out with the Indians, you know. I spent more time drinking alcohol than actually studying. But, it was the enrichment of life over there. And I come back and then I found that I had a few units to finish. So, because I didn't finish it over there because I was too busy having a good time, But anyway, I came back to UNS, I think it was called, UNSW COFA then. It changed while I was overseas. So I came back to another institution and done a few units and finished there. And then once I finished that, it's like I kept on getting these invitations from one place to another to come and live and make art, like 3 months in a studio here, 3 months in a studio there. And what they would do is pay your flights, your accommodation, your food, and give you a per diem for materials. Yep. But they never ever come away with money. So, like, I kind of went from one to another, all around probably the major cities in Australia, and then New Zealand, England. I went to Canada about 3 or 4 times, the USA. But all this happened in a space of 5 or 6 years, and it was so wonderful. It's like the planets had aligned, and each residency would line up with one another.
Yeah.
It's like, it was planned or something. So I was lucky. It's sort of a enrichment of life where you go to live in other cultures for 3 to 6 months and just engage with the locals and
It's
party
major
and have a good time and make art. And a lot of times, there's no money left for you to send the work back, and I got in the habit of burying work, digging a hole and putting it somewhere, in Canada or in New Zealand. I know those works are probably still there. I don't know where they are.
Are you serious? Oh my God. Okay. So along the way, you would have met a lot of artists in these countries. Do you keep in touch with any of the?
No, I don't. No. It's because, look, I'm too busy moving on. Like it's like when you do an artwork. That's gone. You get it out of the studio. And I think my life had been like that in that with people too. You go from one country to another, you meet all these people, you swap, addresses and stuff like that, and, I'll be in contact, but you never do, as well, because you're too busy moving on as well. You're too busy going to this place. And it's the same with the artwork that you do, Once it's go out of the studio, it's finished.
That's it.
I'm too busy moving on. Like many times I've run into people who seen an artwork of mine, and they'll come up and they talk to me about that artwork as if I had done it yesterday, and it's like it becomes a thing about questioning, to find out what sort of art, and backward and forward, and then eventually you'll find out that was a work I done 20 years ago, and you're trying to remember things about it, as well. But it's like I always move on. I don't have contact with often people that I make because I'm too busy making new contact. I don't have contact with my old artwork because I'm moving on. I'm like, for me, the art process and an art practice is one of accumulation, where you build, and in doing that artwork and building that artwork, you are building a platform in which you stand on, and it's a platform of honesty as well, and
you're putting your whole self out there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. So, and we continue doing that. It's just the way it is. I wish I can, keep contact with people, but it's hard because it requires a lot of energy.
I remember you saying once, though, that you said something like, what is your best artwork? Your best artwork has not been made yet. So so it's always looking forward and not looking back. And
that's
you've just
right,
said that. So I heard you say that years ago.
That's actually a good question.
Yeah.
Because people will ask, what's your best artwork?
Haven't made it yet.
How do you answer that? So I always say, it's the next one. Because whatever you've done in the past will find its way in the work that you're doing now.
So it's like, do you think, so your career has spanned many years. I'm not saying that you're old, but your career has spanned many years. Do you see it as one, I know you're not thinking about the past works or the prior works, but do you see it as one large body of work? Because, there's kind of like a vein running through the work, and it is, yes, all about your Aboriginality, our Aboriginality. It's like an ongoing story. Do you think?
Absolutely.
It's just like a massive body of work.
Yeah. There's a conceptual thread through everything that I do. One of the first things that happened in my foundation year at art college is my teacher said to all us foundation year students about being honest with yourself. And what she did was she came in one day with this big bag like Santa Claus, and she just tipped it all out on the floor. All of our students were sitting around looking, and in that big bag was big mobs of mirrors, looking glasses, all different size, all different shapes. And she said to the 15 to 20 students, foundation year students, pick a mirror. And like they grabbed the mirror and looking at it and grooming themselves, just playing, and we all grabbed a mirror and just looking at it, and she said, choose carefully because you're going to have that mirror for 3 or 4 months. And so they changed mirror, and anyway, I ended up with a mirror like my uncle had. It was like a mirror that you find in a swag with leather and all that. So what we had to do, the exercise is that every month that mirror's got to be with you at all times, and you have to look at that mirror and ask that question, who am I? And we do that for 3 months, as well. Yeah. And all that was about is knowing you,
and honesty.
And she said, look, when you even go past the shop windows, look and you say, who am I? That sort of thing. And as a student, we'd done that. And all that was just to get to know you and to be honest with yourself. And it's from then that you form that platform of honesty. What was your original question?
It wasn't really a question. I think it was more a statement about, I guess, that common thread running through your work for this period of time. It's
well, to
massive.
get that common thread, you have to be honest with yourself first. Like that's the basis. If there's any young artists that are here, yes, there is young artists here. You have to start with that honesty. And in my foundation year too, one of the major things they said to me too is that you have to write a philosophy. In your first year, they get you to do a philosophy of your art. And I did. I worked on a philosophy, and my philosophy went something like, my art making, my practice is located on the interface where Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal cultures converge. My art sought to address issues and concerns like land rights, identity, and it went on. And more and more my artwork is commenting on world issues and world concerns, If a decision was made on the 11th floor of Enron that puts a mining peg into Aboriginal land in the middle of desert, how do I make them accountable? So it's like, I made the statement. More applause. I made the statement, right, in my foundation year, and my work stood true to that statement right up until now. Like, I might add a sentence or take away, but that sentence resides in my practice. And that's the conceptual thread that flows through my practice as well.
That's fantastic.
And through that honesty, that platform of honesty, and through sticking with a philosophy or a concept that allows me to do what I do, and it allows me to stay solid and strong and not deviate or be knocked off my platform of honesty as well.
So I have a question. So I'm thinking about when you created that statement back then. Were you aware, because some artists are really aware of other artists, were you aware of any other artists that were thinking that way, or were you into your practice solely? Some artists are really curious of other artists. Like some artists are inspired so strongly by, I guess, their heroes or inspirations that made them push themselves into becoming a professional artist. Or were you solely blinkers on in your own space?
Oh, look, no one can possibly be an island, on their own. And like at art college as well, like you're bombarded with art history and theory. It's mainly, Western art history and theory.
Yeah.
And you're told of the discourse. I mean, they hit you with these philosophers and arts writers, and you have to be a disciple of this particular writer, and you make art according to the theory and history that these particular theorists have writ. And that way they can position your artwork. And those critics who are disciples of those theorists and philosophers, they can understand your work. Therefore, they will, write about you, and you will get into magazines, you will get into shows because they know what you're writing about. This is what they're trying to tell you at art college, It's like that old thing, what comes first, the chicken or the egg? Well, what comes first, chicken or the egg? The rooster. That was a trick question. But anyway, yeah. I mean, what I'm trying to say is like what they're trying to say is the theorists and the historians and the writers are there. And you as artists, you've got to read what we write and then make art in accord with what we write. Therefore, you will get opportunities because we are, we're on another level, But in reality, my attitude was, as an artist, is you look at the world and you do a picture about that world. And then it's these writers and theorists, they choose whether they want to put your picture within their framework and understanding of their thinking. To answer your question, yes, I did look at a lot of artwork because my lecturers and my teachers and my theory teachers asked me to, as well as looking at all these other artists, because what they do at art college is when they see a young artist doing something and they're going along that line, they will give you a list of other artists to look at to help you.
Oh, it's like this. Oh, it's like that.
Yeah. You copped that at art college.
Yeah, I did.
And I bet you guys too. I know a number of you went to art college, and that's what your teachers do. They see what you're doing and they'll give you a list of artists to research and look at to help you along your practice. So, I did look at a lot of artists and stuff like that.
So do you have a favourite artist?
Yes.
Who is that?
Me.
Oh my God. Okay, of course.
No, I do. And my favourite artists are my friends, At the moment, you're one of my favourite artists, as
Thank
well.
you.
I mean, tomorrow when I go into the studio, there might be Ross Manning might come up, and Ross will be my favourite artist as well. But my favourite artists chop and change, as well. And also, with where I'm at with an artwork as well, because, there are artists that I admire and artists that like influence you in your early years and stuff like that, and you're forever grateful. When I look at all the artists that in James Sourris' collection, it's a wonderful collection because
it's a great collection.
Those names there, at different times I was inspired by every single one of those, artists that are there. And, it's wonderful being such a great company, I think, as well.
Yeah,
not only
absolutely.
with you up here and stuff, but, in that list that was there.
So I want to speak about this, but can I just check the time, please?
10 minutes left.
No. Oh, I wanted to delve into Documenta. Can we perhaps open the floor if anybody had a question? Yes.
Why did you decide to study art and not anything else?
I thought you had to do that to be a real artist. When you can see one of the first images that come up. When I wanted to be an artist, I wanted to be an Aboriginal artist. So I painted on bark. You can see that bark painting, the return dreaming thing. And that's what I wanted to do, And then I realised that, why am I doing this? I mean, this is traditional-oriented work. I don't live traditional way, you know. And I think early on in my life, you know, I realised that art, you know, is about an expression of who we are in ourselves, and maybe I wanted to do that simply because I have always done it, not knowing that I have been doing it. Right from a kid, you know, right from, you know, when I was little, you know, as well. I was always different. My mother told me, my grandfather used to say, gee, that Gordy boy, I think he might be Dibble Dibble boy because all the other kids are playing with each other, but he's over there playing by himself. So in a sense, you know, I was always different, and I've always done things different. I've always looked at the world different. So maybe I always was. It's just that I didn't know that a decision had to be made, you know, and I made that decision, you know, because it's who I was and who I am, you know, as well. And I, you know, like I kind of think that society and culture and the system that we lived in is not conducive to help people to fulfil their potential. In a sense, I'm lucky that that who I am, you know, was realised, I think, you know, and when I, you know, like, you know, like, does that partly answer your question? Yeah.
Anyone else? Yes.
Hi, Gordon. First of all, I enjoy your discussion because you're real natural. I love that. I just noticed a lot of your artworks have a kangaroo through them. And I know you talked about colonisers as being the vermin and the feral animals coming in. So are the kangaroos basically just a metaphor for Aboriginal people as opposing the coloniser? Is that what it is through all that theme?
Well, it's quite funny, you know, like, you know, along with inspiration from George Orwell. Yeah, that was another inspiration to answer that question way back. Yeah, along from that inspiration from George Orwell, where I was using all different introduced species, all different native animals. But somehow, kangaroos become one of the major metaphorical references, you know, in clarifying my reality. And when I think about it, growing up in Cloncurry, in a outback, almost a frontier town, you know, like there was a lot of shooting, there was a lot of, and I used to do a lot of shooting, you know, with a .22, then as I got older, with a bigger gun. So, I mean, we did shoot a lot of kangaroos for sport, mainly, as a young man growing up with my peers and friends. I must admit, though, growing up, I used to miss on purpose, you know, and so maybe, you know, like me doing that now is like a redemption song. Sounds like Bob Marley. Yeah, like, you know, it's like giving back to something that perhaps was unsavoury as a kid, you know, growing up as well. But having said that, growing up that way with roo shooting and in Cloncurry, yeah, I have an intimate relationship, you know, with kangaroos, wallabies, euros, and all those marsupials as a kid, you know, that was there as well. And, you know, to skin, to be up close, to see roos on the side of the road hit by cars, you know, things like that. So in the end, the kangaroo became easy for me to draw. And like, I can knock them up very, very quickly, like I did for Zika there. You know, just, yeah, done it like that, just before coming in here. Look, kangaroo, to me, has become a loaded icon or image in this country as well, because it symbolised something. What do you call a group of zebras? A dazzle. That's got nothing to do with what I'm saying, but
My
a group
God.
of kangaroo you call a mob. So it, like metaphorically, it fits with
Fits the
with
criteria.
us as people, because we've Aboriginal people, we call ourselves a mob as well. So it's like that metaphor and that connection resounds strongly. And look, I mean, there's kangaroos everywhere on Qantas, and it's pretty much used, you know, with the rugby league team calling themselves Kangaroos, and another team call themselves Wallabies, and you know, so it's a major icon, and it's like I've used it within my language, you know, to mean something as well. And every kangaroo that I've done possesses elements of all the kangaroos that I've done previously as well.
Great. Any final questions?
Oh, does that
Okay.
answer your question? Sorry. Yeah.
I was wondering if, so you talked about your work being an invitation for new Australians to see the world with the eyes of Aboriginal people. So can you explain a bit more what that means, and like how new Australians and migrants like myself should be seeing Australia through Aboriginal eyes? And do you see like the possibility of us? Because like I don't know where I sit as a migrant in Australia moving forward as us, if that makes any sense.
Yes, it does. You're well on the way to Aboriginalisation, simply because we yarn and we hang out.
Especially
and have
her,
conversation.
though. Yes, she's definitely one of us.
Yeah, as well.
Yeah.
And it's of course it's about education, and it's not, the onus isn't on blackfellows, Aboriginal people, to educate yous. Yous have to educate
It's
yourself.
not our duty.
As well. Is it? Sorry?
It's not our duty.
No, it's not. No, because we don't get paid
That's right.
to educate as well. So you know, the onus is on yous. I mean, like I could do an ad. There's like a you know how you have you know, the blue card if you want to work with children, and then you have the green card if you want to work with greenies, or actually get into the USA. Yeah. But there is a black card as well. You know, there's a black card course that which is a start, but also just hanging out with Murray people as well. You know, like what you've been doing when we're at art college as well. So
Yeah, don't believe
I
the
mean,
hype.
and like Aboriginalisation of this country, it's just a metaphor. Lobby the government, perhaps, you know, to put more money into languages. Isn't it wonderful when I look at the Pakeha in New Zealand, and a lot of the Pakeha, you know, are speaking.
Oh, absolutely, it's
a
beautiful.
Maori language. I'd love that to happen in this country. I'd love to go up to Mount Isa, Burketown, and hear everyone talking Gungalita or Wanyi, or it's wonderful, the introduction here, you know, as well.
Beautiful.
And like the Shia is in support for the learning, you know, the or Indigenous languages, and it should. Well, that is the start of this Aboriginalisation kind of concept. I used to symbolise that by painting the Aboriginal flag on glasses, on sunglasses, you know. So you look through the Aboriginal flag, because the Aboriginal flag represents who we are. Well, it did anyway, I mean, but, you know, there's another scenarios taking place in regards to that. So, but, you know, just to see things through our eyes and our way, and look at the world, how we feel it, or whatever. You know, like it's complex kind of thing that I'm talking about as well. But good question.
Great question.
Yeah.
Yeah. We are going to have to, unfortunately, leave it there. I'm sure we could chat all night. I would like to remind everyone that this discussion tonight is being recorded, and if you wanted to catch up on it, send it to any of your friends, let anyone know. It will be posted onto the State Library of Queensland YouTube, and also the next iteration of this Portrait of an Artist will be in October. I'd like to thank you, Gordon.
Yeah, who will the artist be in October?
I do not know. I am very sorry. Why did you ask me that question? That's a question that I can't answer at this time, unfortunately. I'm terribly sorry. I think that's homework. So...
Oh, no.
and
I said it all
that would
tonight.
be great, because I really do want to talk about Documenta. That's another time. So thank you so very much for sharing tonight, and thank you also so much to all of you for coming. There is so much on, so much is happening in Brisbane at the moment. There are some quite significant shows on tonight that we're aware of, so thank you very much for attending. And once again, thank you, Gordon.
Yeah, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you.